My name is Mediv. In my previous life, I was an archaeologist. I had just reached the pinnacle of life because of a discovery that shocked the world, only for a car accident to send me off directly. When I opened my eyes again, I had transmigrated to this other world of magic and swords and become the grandson of Count Hobbiton. My father, known as the Spear of Hobbiton, was a powerful knight of extraordinary talent. At the age of 5, I was found to have a talent for magic, and my status within the family instantly shot through the roof, a winner in life from birth. But the good times didn't last. When I was 10, my father fell on an otherworldly battlefield, and my mother, overwhelmed by grief, followed him in death. From that day on, I became invisible within the family. Today is the opening day of Lauren Magic Academy. I stand at the academy gates and take a deep breath. 8 years. I endured in silence for 8 years, waiting for this very day. Yet fate played a joke on me once again. During the magic affinity test, the magic orb lit up with a dark, deathly black glow. The testing mage looked at the result with pity in his eyes. Super necromantic affinity. The surroundings instantly erupted, and whispers surged like a tide. A necromancer? Isn't that a cursed profession? What a pity. If this affinity had been for any other element, he'd definitely be a genius. I said nothing. Why are necromancers cursed? 1,000 years ago, a necromantic calamity swept across the plains, and in the end the god of light, at the cost of his own fall, bestowed a dying blessing of hospice care. From then on, in all lands covered by the temple of light, all the dead would be purified by holy light. For a necromancer, casting a spell on a blessed corpse was no different from suicide. This profession had long since been reduced to a stinking gutter in the sewers. The mentor assigned to teach me was a scruffy drunkard. When he saw my affinity data, the wine he had just swallowed sprayed right out of his mouth. He didn't give his name, clearly thinking I would never amount to anything. A few days later, I mastered the method of spiritual meditation. Then, with a pained expression, he took out 2 pure corpses that had not been tainted by blessing pollution, and taught me the only offensive spell, bone reanimation. When I successfully cast it, my mentor's eyes lit up, not because I was a genius, but because he wouldn't have to spend money on teaching materials anymore. Immediately after, he handed me a signed scroll. Mediv, you've graduated. I was completely dumbfounded. He pulled out the academy's teaching guidelines. For a necromancer apprentice, the curriculum consisted of only these 2 things. Before I left, he rarely said something genuinely human. The path of a necromancer is a dead end. You're still young, so switch to training as a knight while you still can. I accepted the graduation certificate and turned to leave. A knight? I already was one. It's just that the Hobbiton family was not worthy of knowing. When I returned to the family estate, a group of cousins had long been waiting there. Well, if it isn't our genius mage? A necromancer. Haha, that's hilarious. Trash suits a trash profession. What a perfect match. I swept a cold gaze over them and said nothing. Just then, my smiling tiger Uncle Vist arrived with the family clerk, his face full of concern as he handed me a letter of appointment. Mediv, now that you are a noble mage, you should have a surname of your own. With the approval of the noble council, from today onward, you are the glorious Odyssey pioneer. Sounds nice, but Odyssey is the deathly scorched wasteland beyond the frontier, a cursed land left behind by the Great War 300 years ago. Those pioneers who go there have virtually no chance of survival. It is called pioneering, but in truth it is exile. I accepted the letter of appointment, my expression calm. It doesn't matter. I've long wanted to leave this cold place. But it still wasn't over. People from the Nuent family had come as well. They had once arranged a childhood betrothal with my father, and now that I had fallen into ruin overnight, they naturally hurried to draw a clear line between us. The crowd gathered around, waiting to see me make a fool of myself when the engagement was broken off. Before they could say a word, I took the marriage contract and tore it to pieces in front of everyone. I agree. The surroundings fell silent for a moment, probably because they hadn't expected me to be so straightforward. He's just putting on a brave front, someone muttered. I drove my carriage away from Hobbiton Manor without looking back. Heading west all the way, I passed through the portal to reach the border city of Zaun, then went through Winter Fortress, and finally set foot on the wastelands of Odyssey. Once I left the fortress patrol zone, all that remained in the world was desolation. When I stopped the carriage to rest the horses, a cooing sound suddenly came from inside. I gripped my sword and felt my way over, lifted the storage chest, and froze. A girl was hiding inside, my fiancée, Audrey. Why are you here? She coughed a few times and confessed awkwardly. I originally wanted to ask you in private what you thought about breaking off the engagement. I hid in the carriage because I was afraid of being discovered, but then they suddenly came in. And in a panic, I drank a concealment potion. A concealment potion, also known as a fake death potion. After drinking it, your mind stays clear, but your body cannot move. This girl really has a lot of nerve. To have lain defenseless in my carriage for several days like that. I wanted her to go back, but she lifted her chin. You can pursue freedom, and I can choose not to be bound. Anyway, my family has already disowned me, so I'm going with you on this adventure. Odyssey is no good place. So a frail mage apprentice like you needs a knight to protect you even more. She tapped her breastplate with her sword, her eyes shining. I've trained hard in battle aura since I was little, all for this day. I looked at her and said nothing more. As night fell, I built a fire and roasted rabbit meat. When the special spices were sprinkled on, the tempting aroma of the meat drifted with the wind and drew uninvited guests. Dozens of vicious-looking thugs closed in from the darkness, staring greedily at Audrey and the roast meat. Yo, looks like we're in for a feast tonight. That little girl isn't bad, and that boy is pretty good-looking too. Don't damage either of them. Amid the filthy talk, Audrey drew her sword and stood protectively in front of me. Mediv, I'll hold them off. You run. The hand holding her sword trembled slightly. There were several apprentice knights on the other side who had trained in battle aura. She wasn't confident she could win. I pressed a hand on her shoulder and pulled her behind me. Your laughter is very unpleasant. As the words fell, my figure vanished from where I stood in an instant. Sword light burst forth as I moved like a ghost. The blade covered in battle aura slashed through the night sky, sending up spray after spray of scorching blood. Those apprentice knights hastily drew their swords to block. With a sharp crack, their swords were cut straight through by battle aura, and my blade swept across their throats without the slightest resistance. A few minutes later, I flicked the blood from my sword and walked back to the fire. Behind me, corpses lay scattered all over the ground. Audrey's eyes were wide, her mouth open wide enough to fit an egg. Why, you're a first-rank knight. The Hobarton family was not worth my service. My life is mine to decide. I picked up the roasted rabbit, calmly tore off a piece of meat, and handed it to her. She stared blankly for quite a while, then took the rabbit meat and bit down hard. Her eyes suddenly lit up, startlingly bright. It's so delicious. Mediv, you're such a wonderful surprise. I used to imagine us going on adventures together, fighting side by side in desperate situations, and then you suddenly revealing your strength and beating all the bad guys flat. I just didn't expect it to come true so soon. The more she spoke, the more excited she became. I even imagined before that maybe one day, in a burst of emotion, you'd pin me against the wall. Eat your meat. I cut off her wild fantasy. After we eat, go dig up those skeletons buried underground. Why not use the ready-made corpses? She pointed at the bandits on the ground. I shook my head. In my spirit vision, those corpses were emitting a faint white glow. That was the holy light of the hospice blessing. Casting necromancy on them was no different from suicide. What I need are old bones buried deep underground, ancient remains untainted by blessings. We each took a shovel and dug beneath the ruins. Soon, I dug up a complete human skeleton. Entering a spell-casting state, a line of information appeared in my mental vision. Time of death, 137 years. Black necromantic light gathered at my fingertips. Following another strange casting method, as if engraved into my soul, I brought the black light down. A skeleton without flesh and blood being torn apart rose up. That skeleton melted and reformed directly within the black light, finally condensing into a pale green bone arm. A line of information flooded into my mind. Green bone component can be used to assemble a green bone skeleton. A green bone skeleton starts at apprentice knight level upon revival, with a growth cap of tier 2. My heart suddenly jolted. This was no ordinary necromancy. I continued digging like mad, examining bones from different eras. When the black necromantic light was aimed at bones between 5 and 50 years old, a gray light appeared in my vision. The bones turned into gray bone components, which could summon gray bone skeletons, with strength equivalent to militia and a growth cap of apprentice knight. Bones from 50 to 100 years old emitted a pale white glow. The bones were refined into white bone components. When I infused the black light into an 87-year-old leg bone, the bone fragments reshaped themselves within the glow. Brand new information surfaced in the depths of my consciousness. The soul of an archaeologist from my previous life fused with the mage talent of this life, and unexpectedly mutated into a unique time spell. The older the history of the bones, the more powerful the undead I summoned became. How was this a necromancer? I was clearly an archaeologist born specifically for this land of buried bones. Audrey came over with a shovel on her shoulder. What did you discover this time? Looking over this wasteland that had buried countless years, I smiled for the first time. A white bone skeleton starts out equivalent to an elite soldier, with a growth cap of Tier 1. When the black necromantic light targeted a set of bones over 300 years old, Mediva's mental vision lit up with a striking blue glow. Bones older than 300 years would be transformed into blue bone components. Mediv could not see any more information. His spiritual realm was not strong enough. He needed to become a Tier 1 mage before he could refine bones over 300 years old and obtain detailed information. When the black necromantic light targeted those fresh corpses, Mediva's mind throbbed with pain, and he quickly canceled the spell. Corpses less than 5 years old cannot trigger the time spell. If he used conventional skeletal resurrection, he would suffer backlash from the hospice blessing. Mediv had not been a necromancer for long, and his mana was scarce. After casting the time spell a few times, he had to meditate to recover. For the next few days, Audrey spent her time digging while Mediv passed the days casting spells and meditating. After several busy days, the box beside Mediv contained more than 20 skeletal components. Human skeletal components are divided into 6 parts: the skull, torso bone, left and right arm bones, and left and right leg bones. The bones beneath these ruins all had some age to them. Of those 20-odd skeletal components, more than half were green bone over 100 years old. Different bones had different specialties, and Mediv selected a set of warrior skeletal components from among them. He began the first temporal skeletal resurrection. Under his mana control, the 6 green bone parts rose and assembled and fused within the magic rune array. Resurrecting the green bone skeleton was difficult for Mediv, and fine beads of sweat soon appeared on his forehead. He gritted his teeth and persevered, and just as his mind began to blur, a spring of sweet water descended. The green bone skeleton was successfully resurrected. He received feedback from the Fountain of Time. Not only was his mana fully restored, but his spiritual power also increased somewhat. The Time Skeletal Resurrection spell could actually strengthen spiritual power. This made Mediv even more excited. With such a talent, he had no need to worry about cultivation resources at all. A green bone skeleton warrior was equivalent to an apprentice knight, and its green bones were extremely hard. Not much weaker than Audrey. Mediv, am I really useless? After years of hard training, I'm only a little stronger than a skeleton. Mediv casually revived. Audrey began to doubt her life. No, you're very talented. I think highly of you. The reason the green bone skeleton warrior could fight Audrey to a draw was that it did not fear injury. Flesh and blood simply cannot compare to the undead in this respect. In fact, Audrey was still quite strong. She was not far from tempering her battle chi and advancing to a first-tier knight. Becoming a knight was the real qualitative change. The gap between apprentice knights was not that great. Mediv took out the unused knight cultivation resources and gave them to Audrey, guiding her training. This was a reward for her hard excavation work over the past few days. With the green bone skeleton warrior, she no longer needed to do this hard labor and could train in peace. In the blink of an eye, Mediv had already been in the Odyssey region for a month and a half. During this month and a half, aside from eating and resting, Mediv spent all his other time meditating and refining skeletal parts. He refined nearly 200 skeletons, most of them skeletons with a history of 100 to 300 years, while the rest were all over 50 years old. As for the refined skeletal parts, he matched, assembled, and resurrected them according to each skeleton's specialization. During the subsequent assembly and resurrection, Mediv discovered that he gained an increase in spiritual power every time. But that state of complete recovery of mana and spiritual power only occurred when he resurrected a new type of skeleton. At present, 6 white bone skeletons and 12 green bone skeletons were active in the ruins. The white bone skeletons consisted of 4 farmers and 2 hunters. The green bone skeletons consisted of 8 farmers, 1 hunter, and 3 warriors. This ruin may once have been a village, and most of the skeletons buried underground were farmers. White bone skeletons were roughly as strong as elite soldiers, while green bone skeletons were equivalent to apprentice knights. In actual combat, warriors were better than hunters, who were far better than farmers. Green bone skeleton farmers were not good at fighting. What they relied on was their sturdy bone bodies and lack of pain. The skeletons resurrected through time skeletal resurrection did not require Mediv to provide additional equipment. Skeleton farmers came with bone sickles, skeleton hunters came with bone bows and bone arrows, and skeleton warriors came with bone swords, bone shields, and bone armor. Their equipment was an extension of their bone bodies, and if damaged, it could slowly recover. During this month and a half, aside from initially encountering a gang of thugs active near the ruins, after that only wild beasts occasionally came to attack, so things were fairly peaceful. Medivh arranged for those skeleton warriors and hunters to patrol and hunt, while the farmers dug up underground skeletons at the locations he marked. This residential area had existed for quite some time before, and many remains had been buried here. Perhaps because they had been bathed in holy light, the skeletons in this world were less prone to decay. During this period, the farmer dug up several sets of remains more than 500 years old. In spell vision, those remains shone with a dazzling purple light. However, such extremely old remains preserved only because they had been properly buried were very rare. He was not surprised by this. In his previous life's archaeological work, he had handled quite a few complete 1,000-year-old skeletons. Some that were especially well preserved even still had flesh and blood. Medivh was only a mage apprentice and did not even have the ability to refine blue bones, so he could only store the purple bones away for now and use them later when his level improved. Lord West, the mercenaries in the Odyssey Pioneer territory have sent word that Medivh was not seen there. While Medivh was busy excavating history, West's steward reported the reply from afar to him. It has been nearly 2 months since Medivh left Winter Fortress, and he still has not reached the Pioneer territory. I overestimated him. He can't even make it to the Pioneer territory? West set down the letter in his hand, his gaze dark. He felt that Medivh had a seasoned personality and might become a threat to him, so he deliberately arranged a grand show. In the end, Medivh could not even make it onto the stage. My lord, even if Medivh has a little cleverness, what can a necromancer apprentice do? The steward flattered West's arrangements. Medivh had just graduated from the Mage Academy, and then exile and a broken engagement came one after another, leaving him no time to catch his breath. Aside from Audrey, who had followed him by accident, he did not have a single guard by his side. A necromancer apprentice is just a useless cripple, and a beautiful, noble young lady like Audrey would be very eye-catching in Odyssey. This pair would be prey pursued by ruffians. So it is only normal that they could not reach the Pioneer territory. Have them search once along the way back. This money can't be spent for nothing. West gave a slight nod. He agreed with the steward's analysis. But since the money had already been paid, he could not let those mercenaries earn it too easily. He had the mercenaries search along the road, just in case. Medivh, are you designing a castle? At lunch, seeing Medivh writing and drawing on paper, Audrey leaned her head over. That's right, we can't keep living in the carriage forever. I'm planning my territory. Medivh nodded. On that draft paper were 2 kinds of architectural designs. One was small squares, 10 by 10, each with sides 100 meters long. The other was large squares with sides 1,000 meters long. The clustered small squares were residential districts, and in each small square, 2 rows of apartment buildings would be built back to back. The left side, right side, and center line were 3 longitudinal streets, while the top and bottom edges were transverse streets. The large squares were the development zones he had planned. The boundary of each large square was a ring of fort towers, and the distance between 2 large squares formed the main road. His future territory would be enclosed within the fort towers. For the fort towers on both sides of the main road, the inner forts were residences for the logistics skeletons of the corresponding area, while the outer forts were residences for the warriors. This was a massive project. Only an infrastructure maniac like Medivh would design it this way. In any case, undead skeletons never tire. Once the number of skeletons under his command grows, there will be plenty of workhorses to do the labor. In his previous life, Medivh had been a highly knowledgeable scholar, so some things came naturally to him. During this period, the bones excavated by the skeleton farmers were enough for him to convert for quite some time. He designed a simple brick kiln and directed the skeleton farmers to build the kiln and fire bricks, producing construction materials. Oh, since when did a camp appear here? The smoke from the brick kiln was extremely conspicuous, attracting a band of ruffians wandering the wilderness. Haha, what do I see, skeletons? There's actually a necromancer here, Your Excellency. When they saw the skeletons moving around outside the camp, the band of ruffians burst into laughter. Necromancers had been in decline for 1,000 years and were long no longer synonymous with fear. Mages are all high and mighty, except necromancers. In this day and age, even a somewhat sturdy farmer can bully a necromancer apprentice. Hey, let me see. Quite a few skeletons here. Enough for me to smash with one hand? A thug as skinny as a monkey jumped out and boasted that he could smash those dozen-odd skeletons with one hand. Monkey, go warm up a bit. and let that necromancer lord understand what it means that times have changed." The other thugs whistled and egged him on, telling Skinny Monkey to solo those skeletons by himself. At the thought of those skeletons, which the necromancer had probably gone bankrupt to create, being smashed to death like stray dogs by the roadside, they were thrilled beyond measure. There are not many chances to bully a mage like this. In this era, very few people are willing to become necromancers. Skinny Monkey cast a contemptuous glance at the skeleton warrior, put away his chipped iron blade, and picked up a wooden club from the ground. He felt that using a blade against undead skeletons would be an insult to his weapon, and that he could smash an undead skeleton to pieces with a single swing. "Break for me." Skinny Monkey leaped high and brought it down toward the skeleton warrior's forehead. The skeleton warrior raised its bone shield with its left hand to block, while its right hand bone sword swept upward with the motion. They had thought Skinny Monkey was something special, but when that jumping chop struck the bone shield, the skeleton warrior did not budge an inch. Instead, the skeleton warrior's seemingly light upward slash split Skinny Monkey's smug face in two. How is that possible? Skinny Monkey fell backward, and the thugs were stunned. Weren't undead skeletons supposed to be the kind that any old farmer could smash apart with a few swings? Why was this skeleton different, killing Skinny Monkey in an instant? Skinny Monkey wasn't considered strong among them, but surely he shouldn't have lost to a mere undead skeleton, right? There's something strange about that skeleton. Get him together. Someone had died, and the thug leader put away his smile and called for his men to attack together. He didn't think the skeleton warrior could beat all of them. If they had thought they couldn't win, they would have made a strategic retreat long ago. Damn it, why is this skeleton so strong? You never know until you fight. Once they did, no one had anything to say. The green-boned skeleton warrior made the thug leader question his life. He was a seasoned squire knight, although he had not yet refined his blood and vigor into battle chi. With his strong physique, taking on a dozen elite soldiers was no problem. Yet his strength was only evenly matched with a skeleton. Could it be that necromancers were rising again? 3 green-boned skeleton warriors, each comparable to a seasoned squire knight. Green-boned skeleton hunters, 1 arrow, 1 kill. Green-boned skeleton farmers, not good at fighting, but relying on their fearlessness of injury, they cut down ordinary thugs like wheat. Not long after the battle began, more than half the thugs had fallen. Retreat. The thug leader could not figure out why this was happening, but he knew it was time to run. If he didn't, they would all die here. You think you can leave after coming here? The thug leader was dead set on escaping, and the skeleton warriors couldn't stop him. Mediv stopped watching the show, battle chi erupting, and in a flash he caught up to the thug leader. A knight. Covering his neck unwillingly, the thug leader collapsed. That sword strike had contained battle chi. Clearly, the one who killed him was a knight. It's over so quickly. Audrey had just cut down a rookie squire knight, and when she looked around, there were no thugs left standing. Who knew how Mediv had done it? But the skeletons he created were astonishingly powerful. The thought lasted less than a second before she ran off to find Mediv and claim credit. They were in the same boat. It was a good thing that Mediv's magic was powerful. After briefly looting the spoils, Mediv had the bone farmers drag the corpses to the burial ground. Fresh corpses were useless to him. They needed to be buried in the soil and tempered by the passage of time. In the Odyssey region, there were countless bandit gangs, with foreign tribes eyeing it like tigers watching their prey, and magical beasts roaming everywhere, making it an extremely dangerous and chaotic land. If they wanted to rise in the Odyssey region, there would be no shortage of battles ahead. Today's fight was just an appetizer. After wiping out the attacking bandit gang, Mediv returned to the pile of bones to refine skeletal components. Just as apprentice knights were broadly divided into rookie, beginner, and veteran levels, mage apprentices were also divided into low, middle, and high ranks. Rookie level referred to apprentice knights who had just begun practicing breathing techniques and started accumulating blood chi. These apprentice knights were generally average in strength, and those with little combat experience might not even be able to beat elite soldiers. Beginner level referred to apprentice knights who had accumulated a large amount of blood chi and used it to strengthen their physiques. Even with little combat experience, apprentice knights of this kind could rely on their robust physiques to take on several elite soldiers. Greenbone skeleton farmers were roughly equivalent to this type of apprentice knight. Veteran level referred to apprentice knights whose chi and blood were abundant and who had begun refining blood into chi. These apprentice knights had vigorous chi and blood and strong physiques, and taking on a dozen or so elite soldiers was no problem. Audrey was a veteran apprentice knight. Veteran apprentice knights still belonged to the category of ordinary people just somewhat stronger warriors. Only by refining blood into chi and possessing battle chi, thus becoming a formal knight, could one be considered a transcendent. Mages were different. As long as they learned mental meditation methods and spells, even low-level mage apprentices were considered transcendent. The rank divisions for mage apprentices were much more detailed than those for apprentice knights, being graded according to the strength of their mental power. Apprentice knights only needed to eat in order to cultivate, and the more nutritious the food, the better it was at improving chi and blood. For mage apprentices, pure meditation was very inefficient. They needed meditation potions to improve their cultivation efficiency. Medivh was just a passerby at Lorne Magic Academy and had no chance to obtain meditation potions at all. But he was extraordinarily gifted and could, by casting the Time Bone Resurrection spell, receive feedback from the Fountain of Time and strengthen his mental power. He had improved greatly over the past month and a half and was about to advance to an intermediate mage apprentice. The stronger the mental power, the more mana could be converted, and the more skeletal components could be refined. The more skeletal components there were, the more time skeletons could be resurrected with spells. The more feedback he gained from the Fountain of Time, the greater his mental power would grow. This was a chain of positive feedback, and he would only grow stronger and stronger. Yaha, we finally have a home. A week later, Audrey ran excitedly around a small brick and tile house with 3 rooms. From the day they left Lawrence City until today, a little over 2 months had passed. They finally no longer had to live in the carriage and now had a home that could shelter them from the wind and rain. Medivh, you're so thoughtful. Upon entering the bedroom and seeing the steaming bath, Audrey cried out excitedly. After living rough on the road for 2 months, she was finally able to take a hot bath. In another bedroom, Medivh was lying in a hot spring pool with his eyes closed, relaxing his mind. He hadn't specially equipped Audrey with a bath. He had simply built one for her while setting one up for himself. In the blink of an eye, more than another week had passed. On this day, Medivh crossed the threshold of mental power and became an intermediate mage apprentice. Normally, intermediate mage apprentices were still studying at the academy. He had mastered several spells. Medivh was a necromancer apprentice and didn't receive that kind of treatment. After learning the mental meditation technique and bone resurrection, he was driven out of the magic academy. He had nowhere to learn new spells, so he could only cast time-enhanced bone resurrection over and over again. The place Medivh chose to settle was extremely remote and barren, with nothing much to plunder. For more than half a month, aside from the occasional wild beasts coming to forage at night, there were no other enemies. Skeletons did not need rest, and those beasts were dealt with by the skeleton hunters before they could even get close to the brick and tile hut. After his spiritual power increased, Medivh refined bone parts much more smoothly, and his efficiency improved considerably. During this time, Medivh had not been slacking off. Around the brick and tile hut, there were now 2 white bone farmers, for green bone farmers, and 2 green bone warriors. As his spiritual power grew stronger, and as more and more bone parts piled up in the warehouse, Medivh's speed in creating time skeletons improved quite a bit. Rumble. A clap of thunder brought dark clouds, and the rainy season in the Odyssey region arrived. Days of rain turned the ground into a muddy mess, and the Odyssey region entered a rare period of peace. In this torrential weather, bandit gangs and alien tribes alike did not like going out to hunt. The rainy season did not affect Medivh. The brick and tile warehouse had stockpiled a large amount of bones, more than enough to last until the end of the rainy season. After more than 2 months of digging, all the bones in the upper underground layer of these ruins had been excavated. As for the deeper areas, his spiritual power was insufficient to probe them, so he could not mark their locations and did not excavate there. After digging up the underground bones, the skeletons did not stay idle. They made raw bricks and fired bricks in the warehouse by the brick kiln. Several more brick and tile warehouses had appeared on the ruins, making them far less desolate than when he had first arrived. In the main hall of the brick and tile hut, Medivh sat amid a pile of bones, intently refining bone parts. Resting her chin on her hand, Audrey lay on the table watching Medivh. She was not wearing the outfit and armor she had on when going out, but a dress bought at the market in Winter Fortress. The plain dress could not hide her bearing, and when she moved, her proud figure was even harder to conceal. She did not mind showing off her figure in front of Medivh. There were only the 2 of them here. She could not beat Medivh, and if Medivh had any improper thoughts, she would not be able to stop him anyway. At this point, if Medivh really wanted to do something, she would not mind. Unfortunately, Medivh's mind was full of skeletons right now, completely unmoved by the beautiful sight before him. Enemies are here. Medivh suddenly raised his head and looked outside the door. He sensed that skeletons were fighting something. Audrey followed him under the eaves to look and saw who the enemies were. They were a group of murlocs with fish fins on their backs. In this stormy weather, only murlocs liked roaming around and pillaging. Need support? Audrey looked up and asked, and Medivh shook his head slightly. There were only a little over 30 murlocs in that group, and he had not detected any Tier 1 murlocs. The skeletons were enough to deal with them. Before long, the group of murlocs was wiped out. Be careful. As the skeleton farmers carried the murloc corpses, Audrey frowned and reminded Medivh. Murloc blood had a special fishy smell. Once the wind spread it, other murlocs could smell it from far away. Killing this group of murlocs would likely stir up a hornet's nest and attract wave after wave of murlocs seeking revenge. I know. Medivh understood the traits of murlocs. The moment he saw the murlocs, he knew trouble had arrived. The murlocs had already reached his doorstep. If he didn't fight, he couldn't stop them, and if he did fight, it would draw their hatred. After killing one wave, it would attract several more. Unless the rainy season ended or they were thoroughly intimidated, they would not settle down. Panic was of no help at all in solving the problem. Medivh calmly walked into the warehouse next door and picked out a set of greenbone warrior parts with a history of more than 250 years from the display rack. The older the parts, the harder they were to resurrect. He had experimented before when he was still a junior mage apprentice, and he had failed to resurrect greenbone parts older than 200 years. Now he was an intermediate mage apprentice, with stronger spiritual power and mana, so perhaps he could resurrect it successfully. This resurrection was just as difficult as his first resurrection of a greenbone warrior, and beads of sweat the size of beans slid down his forehead. Fortunately, it was within his abilities. Just as his mana was about to run dry, the bones in the magic array finished assembling and stood up. Its color was deeper than that of the greenbone warrior resurrected from bones that were a little over 100 years old, and its bone body was sturdier. It was closer to the threshold between a squire knight and a knight, not a first-tier extraordinary creation. They're here. Medivh's mana had barely recovered when the murlocs came calling again. There was no luck involved at all. Other murlocs had been drawn over by the bloody smell of their kin. This time, the murloc force was even larger, but Medivh did not make a move. He needed to conserve his strength to deal with any extraordinary murlocs that might be drawn over. Against murlocs below the extraordinary level, the skeletons were enough. Under the leadership of 5 greenbone warriors, the skeletons only needed a little time to slaughter all the attacking murlocs. The bloody smell in the air grew even stronger. This was not the end. Barring accidents, more murlocs would be drawn over by the scent of blood. The murloc attacks came faster and faster. Not long after the second wave of murlocs died, the third wave charged over. Before the third wave had even been completely killed, the fourth and fifth waves rushed in from different directions. Medivh did not go to support the brick warehouse. He was staring at the sixth wave of murlocs in the curtain of rain. That group of murlocs was not large, but the threat was enormous. He sensed 2 extraordinary murlocs. Extraordinary murlocs had keen perception, and they charged straight toward the brick and tile hut. Only the extraordinary could defeat the extraordinary. Medivh advanced with sword in hand, taking on 2 alone. Audrey and the newly resurrected greenbone warrior intercepted the strong murlocs below the extraordinary level. This was Medivh's first extraordinary battle. Taking on 2 alone, it was hard to say whether he could even win, let alone win quickly. His usual hard practice in swordsmanship was still useful. Fighting 2 alone, he did not fall into any obvious disadvantage. He could hold his own. Audrey and the greenbone warrior fought with all their might, giving the other murlocs no chance to attack Medivh. Over by the brick warehouse, the greenbone warriors were trying to break through and support their lord. The greenbone warriors' assault capability was quite strong. They feared neither injury nor pain and charged out under the attacks. The remaining greenbone skeletons and whitebone skeletons held back the murlocs there. With the support of the greenbone warriors, the situation improved quite a bit. Unfortunately, the good times did not last long, as another batch of murlocs was drawn over and joined the battle under the shouts of the extraordinary murlocs. If this continued, defeat was certain. While fighting, Medivh thought of a strategy to break the enemy. Clang! The blade struck green bone with a crisp ring, and the blade became lodged in the thick bone armor of the greenbone warrior. Seizing the opportunity, Medivh slashed upward and left a huge wound across the chest of the extraordinary murloc in front of him. When he spun to attack another transcendent murloc, the other side already had time to react. Abandoning its blade, and retreating out of attack range. This was the countermeasure Medivh came up with on the spot, using greenbone warriors to block the blades, then launching a sneak attack while the transcendent Murloc's weapon was pinned. The tactic was very effective and badly wounded one transcendent Murloc. This tactic could only be used once. For once they were on guard, the transcendent Murlocs would not give him another chance to ambush them. Pulling two greenbone warriors over to block blades made Audrey and the other greenbone warriors' pressure sore. Medivh needed to end the battle as quickly as possible, or he would be worn down to death by Murloc reinforcements. Just as Medivh was going all out, trying to kill that badly wounded transcendent Murloc to break the deadlock, an unexpected breakthrough appeared. That greenbone warrior who had just been revived broke through his limits in the fierce battle, awakened bone spirit power, and became a first-tier bone spirit warrior. The bone spirit warrior, fighting like a desperate madman and trading injury for injury, took down the uninjured transcendent Murloc. Medivh seized the momentum and finished off the badly wounded transcendent Murloc. With the two transcendent Murlocs dead, the Murlocs scattered like birds and beasts. The Murlocs that had just appeared at the end of the rain curtain disappeared again. Clearly, the aura of death from the transcendent Murlocs made the ordinary Murlocs feel fear. The transcendent Murlocs were likewise unwilling to come over and take the risk. Medivh, we won. After driving back the Murlocs, Audrey wiped the rainwater from her face and smiled at Medivh. This girl had a very unusual way of thinking, but when it came to fighting, she wasn't delicate at all. There were quite a few bloodstains on her armor, yet she didn't complain about pain. Hey, Audrey. Just as Medivh was about to say something, he saw Audrey's eyes roll back and her collapse to the ground. He quickly ran over, checked her breathing, and after confirming that Audrey had only fainted, he let out a sigh of relief. He picked up Audrey and returned to the cabin to bandage her. Once he removed her armor, he saw that this silly girl was far more seriously injured than Medivh had realized. He used mana to draw out the clotted blood and debris from her wounds, cleaned them with hot water, then applied ointment and bandaged them. After treating the wounds on Audrey's body, Medivh laid her flat on the bed to rest and recover. After settling Audrey, Medivh checked the skeleton troops' battle losses. The result was better than he had expected, aside from the two greenbone warriors that had blocked the blades and were more seriously injured. The other skeletons only had minor bone cracks and would recover after some rest. Time skeletons were tough and durable, unlike flesh and blood bodies that were easily maimed or killed. The Murloc corpses had also received the blessing of light and were not usable necromantic materials. The greatest gain from this battle was that greenbone skeleton who had advanced to a bone spirit warrior. Bone spirit power was a transcendent force similar to battle chi. With an extra transcendent warrior by his side, Medivh felt much more at ease. Crises kept emerging one after another in the Odyssey region, and Medivh did not slack off. After resting briefly, he continued meditating to restore mana, refining bone components, and reviving time skeletons. A senior apprentice knight had a very strong physique, and with Medivh's proper treatment, Audrey's wounds did not worsen, and she woke up later. She made no sound, simply lying quietly on her side, staring at Medivh, who was refining bone components. Awake? Looking up and seeing that Audrey had woken, Medivh walked over to check how her injuries were recovering. Medivh, will you take responsibility? Audrey suddenly blurted out a question. Enough, get some rest, and stop fantasizing. Sooner or later, I'll deal with you. Medivh shot this girl, who loved overthinking when she had nothing better to do, a somewhat speechless glare. If he didn't need to hurry and make more skeletons to strengthen the camp's defenses, he would have dealt with her long ago. Hee. Audrey let out a playful laugh and peacefully closed her eyes. Medivh smiled silently and went back to work. After killing those two extraordinary Murlocs, no Murlocs came to harass them again for the next half-month. There were plenty of places in the Odyssey region worth plundering, so there was no need for the Murlocs to keep banging their heads against a tough target. After half a month of continuous rain, the sky finally cleared, and the rainy season was over. After recuperating for half a month, Audrey's injuries had fully healed, and the skeletons damaged in battle had also recovered. During this time, Medivh resurrected some more skeletons. At present, the ruins camp had 10 whitebone farmers and 4 whitebone hunters. It also had 19 greenbone farmers, 2 greenbone hunters, 7 greenbone warriors, and 1 greenbone blacksmith. There was also 1 first-tier low-level greenbone bone spirit warrior. The time skeleton core was beginning to take shape. The reason resurrection had been so fast during this period was that he had previously stockpiled a large number of mismatched skeletal parts. Those parts were only missing 1 or 2 pieces to make complete sets, and once enough had accumulated, some would always match up. There were still several hundred skeletons worth of bones in the warehouse, enough to last him for quite a while. However, to be prepared, as soon as the weather cleared, Mediv went out and found another residential area ruin, marked the target, and had the skeleton farmers excavate it. The skeleton farmers worked very efficiently and quickly dug up all the bones buried beneath that patch of ruins. They returned to the camp and, under Mediv's command, used the bricks and tiles accumulated during the rainy season to build houses. The camp's buildings were not thrown up at random. The core territory Mediv had planned was an urban area made up of 100-meter square blocks arranged in 10 rows and 10 columns. The foremost central blocks among them were where he intended to build the Lord's castle. The small brick and tile house he currently lived in was built at the northwest corner of Block Row 5, Column 5, belonging to the Castle District. The area directly north of the small brick and tile house, Block Row 5, Column 4, was a row of back-to-back buildings with fort towers on the north side and warehouses on the south side. This row of buildings had already reached 30 meters and was still being extended eastward. Each of the 2 block areas had 5 meters of open space reserved, and between the small brick and tile house and the connected warehouse fort buildings was a 10-meter wide road. In the area directly west of the small brick and tile house, Block Row 4, Column 5, stood a row of warehouse fort buildings constructed lengthwise, with fort towers on the west side and warehouses on the east side. This row of buildings was currently 20 meters long and was extending southward. Mediv's purpose was very clear. First, build a ring of connected warehouse fort buildings around the castle district. Then seal the gaps at the 4 corners, enclosing it into a closed camp, with the warehouse forts serving as the camp walls. Calculating the time, it had been exactly 3 months since he left Lawrence City. His territory had gained a certain foundation, and the next step was to speed up the completion of the warehouse fort construction and obtain a closed camp. Looks like a fat sheep. As soon as the weather cleared, the thugs came out to move around. They had been cooped up in the camp for more than half a month, and many of them had gone hungry. A group of thugs wandered over and became excited at the sight of the neat connected warehouse forts. Anyone able to build such exquisite brick houses in the ruins had to be someone rich. There were no guards patrolling near those brick houses, only dozens of skeletons. At a glance, they looked like easy prey. They were sick of their shabby camp that leaked everywhere whenever it rained. Today they were going to rob some wealth and, while they were at it, move house. This exquisite camp belongs to them now. The thugs howled as they charged over, ready to smash the skeletons to pieces in no time and tie up the camp's owner. Instead, the skeletons taught them a lesson. They were dealt with by the skeletons in no time. Mediv had no intention of taking in any thugs, so the result of the battle was that none were left alive. The skeleton farmers dragged away the thugs one by one, their faces twisted with terror and confusion. They had never expected to lose to skeletons. Aren't undead skeletons supposed to be the weakest combat unit? Could it be that their version was outdated? Mediv was already used to thug raids. Throughout the whole process, he never stepped out of his room and calmly assembled skeletons. After burying the corpses, the skeletons returned to their posts and continued silently building the blockhouses. The rainy season was the calm before the storm. As soon as the skies cleared, the Odyssey region entered a phase of bloodshed and carnage. After going hungry for most of half a month, thug gangs and non-human tribes looted even more frenziedly. Over the following half-month, Mediv's camp endured 2 more thug attacks and 1 goblin tribe attack. That hardly counted as unusually disaster-ridden. It was the normal rhythm of chaos in the Odyssey region. These 3 attacks caused no losses to the camp. The skeletons were tough and durable, and with the Bone Spirit Warrior holding the fort, there was no need for Mediv to act personally. Transcendents were not roadside weeds you could grab by the handful. Aside from the Transcendent Fishmen during the rainy season, Mediv had not encountered any other Transcendents. After half a month, Mediv's camp had changed greatly. In the 5x4 section, the 90-meter-long row blockhouses had already been completed. In the 4x5 section, the row blockhouses had been built to a length of 50 meters. In the 4x4 section, there was a 20-meter-long horizontal, back-to-back, double-story fort tower. The blockhouses only formed 1 ring around the castle district. The other areas would all be this kind of fort tower. That section of fort tower connected across the street through the air with the fort towers in the other 2 sections, forming an aerial corridor. The fort towers of the 3 sections were linked together, forming an integrated city wall, where skeleton hunters could shoot between the crenels. Beneath the aerial corridor was a gatehouse, and in the middle of the gatehouse was installed a large iron-banded wooden gate. The camp's northwest corner had already been sealed off. Skeletons that work around the clock without rest were truly useful. Their construction efficiency was off the charts. After half a month, there were quite a few more skeletons in the camp. 15 whitebone farmers, 6 whitebone hunters, and 1 whitebone warrior. There were 23 greenbone farmers, 3 greenbone hunters, and 11 greenbone warriors. There were also 1 greenbone blacksmith, 1 greenbone butcher, and 1 greenbone cook. There was 1 greenbone bone spirit warrior. Over this little more than half a month, the camp had gained 19 new skeletons. As Mediva's mental power increased, and as he stockpiled more and more skeletal parts, the speed at which he created skeletons was rising. Among those 11 greenbone warriors, there were 2 from whom Mediv had high hopes. They were both skeletons assembled from greenbone parts over 250 years old, and they had a chance of awakening bone spirit power and stepping into the transcendent realm. As for those bones older than 295 years, but with less than 300 years of history, Mediv was keeping them all in reserve. There was surely a huge gap between greenbone and bluebone parts, and he could afford to wait a few years. Mediv, where are you going so early in the morning? A few days later, Audrey saw Mediv gather all the greenbone warriors and asked curiously, "To hunt?" Mediva's eyes shone with excitement. The skeleton hunters who had gone out hunting before dawn had discovered a low-level first-tier magical beast. It was an excellent prey. The flesh and blood of magical beasts is high-energy blood food, an excellent supplement for cultivating battle chi. Mediv cannot cast offensive spells and needs to improve his battle chi to enhance his combat power. "Wait for me." Audrey grew excited as well, shouted, and ran to her room to put on her armor. If they successfully hunted this magical beast, and she ate some magical beast meat, she would surely be able to break through her bottleneck and refine her battle chi. What the skeleton hunters discovered was a cold-horned deer. A magical beast's senses are very sharp, and it woke up as soon as the greenbone warriors approached. Trapped in the cave, the cold-horned deer was very angry. Icicles condensed on its sharp antlers and attacked the greenbone warriors. The greenbone warriors raised their shields to block, and when the icicles fell, they smashed a gap in a bone shield. The cold spread, and a layer of ice formed on the greenbone warrior's shield-bearing bone arm, making its movement sluggish. This greenbone warrior was frozen, and the greenbone warrior behind it stepped forward to take its place, blocking the second icicle. Mediva's plan was very clear. He was using the greenbone warriors to drain the cold-horned deer's magic power. The greenbone warriors took turns tanking damage, so they would not easily suffer losses. After releasing 7 or 8 icicles, the cold-horned deer's antlers were no longer wreathed in cold air as before, clearly showing that the consumption had been considerable. Seeing that not a single greenbone warrior had died, the cold-horned deer grew frantic. It pawed the ground with its hind hooves and charged with its head lowered, trying to smash apart the frozen greenbone warrior. Boom! A dull crashing sound rang out, and the bone spirit warrior struck when it was time to strike, slamming a shield bash into the side of the cold-horned deer's face. Dazed from the blow, the cold-horned deer instinctively unleashed all its magic power, cold energy spilling everywhere and restricting the bone spirit warrior. Chance. Mediv moved as the opportunity arose. Taking advantage of the gap after the cold-horned deer had cast its spell, he rushed forward and left a deep wound on its right forehoof. The unfrozen greenbone warriors surged forward, hacking at the cold-horned deer at all costs. The cold-horned deer cried out in pain and rammed into the greenbone warriors. The greenbone warriors raised their shields to block, but were still sent flying by the impact. While it was in a frenzy, Mediv seized the opportunity and, as it rammed the greenbone warriors, left several more wounds on it. The pain caused the cold-horned deer's eyes to fill with bloodshot veins, and it locked onto Mediv, chasing after him to attack. Mediv was completely unafraid. Without magic power, the cold-horned deer's threat was greatly reduced. From time to time, he controlled a greenbone warrior to block it, and when a greenbone warrior was knocked flying, he would slash the cold-horned deer from the side with his sword. Under Mediva's toying, the cold-horned deer grew weaker and weaker. Once the bone spirit warrior shook off the effects of the cold, there was no more suspense in this battle, and the cold-horned deer died beneath blades and swords. Discovering that the greenbone warriors were automatically absorbing the cold-horned deer's blood splashed onto their bones, Mediv fell into thought. He used magic power to draw together the scattered magical beast blood, wrapping up the 2 strongest greenbone warriors. Within the blood mist, a transcendent aura spread out. And after absorbing the magical beast blood, those two greenbone warriors awakened bone spirit power. Beautiful. With two new transcendent subordinates added, Medivh was overjoyed. Sure enough, every part of a magical beast is a treasure. This blood-containing magic power can promote skeletons to awaken bone spirit power. When he had previously killed a transcendent fishman, this phenomenon had not occurred. Obviously, not all blood is suitable for skeletons to absorb. The greenbone warriors that blocked the charge had severe bone fractures, so Medivh distributed the remaining magical beast blood to them. After absorbing the magical beast blood, the heavily injured greenbone warriors recovered their health and carried the frosthorn deer back to camp. Medivh personally took up the knife and removed the deerskin and antlers. He used the frosthorn deer's magic core as a refrigerator, freezing the butchered chunks of meat and bones. At noon that day, Medivh stewed a pot of meat, and Audrey waited by the stove for him to call everyone to eat. After eating his fill, Medivh took time to practice the breathing technique to improve his battle chi, wasting not a trace of blood vitality. Magical beast meat was the best blood food. And in just 1 week, Medivh, who had remained at first-tier low level for a long time, advanced another step and was promoted to a first-tier mid-level knight. Audrey successfully refined blood into chi, stepped into the extraordinary, and became a first-tier low-level knight. After a week, the chunks of magical beast meat had been eaten up, leaving only meaty bones and offal to be boiled into soup for daily drinking. Battle chi was only one means of strengthening himself. Medivh's focus remained on the mage path. During this week, aside from training his battle chi, he did not slack off for a moment in meditation or in refining bone components. He even turned down Audrey's passionate invitation when she advanced to knighthood. It's a night run. Soon another week passed, and amid the despairing cries of the thugs, Medivh entered his 5th month of becoming a pioneer. Audrey rode back to camp through the northwestern corner gate. Over these past 15 days, the camp had undergone huge changes again. The depot fort in the horizontal 4, vertical 5 area had already been completed, and the depot fort in the horizontal 6, vertical 4 area had reached 80 meters in length. Between the depot forts in the horizontal 5, vertical 4 and horizontal 6, vertical 4 areas was an aerial corridor spanning the street, and below the corridor was the north central gate. The camp was even livelier. Over the past 15 days, there were 12 more white-bone skeletons and 14 more green-bone skeletons. Among the newly added skeletons, farmers still made up the majority. Several ruins excavated by Medivh were not battlefields, but village remains. In 4 months, Medivh had revived 27 white-bone skeletons and 55 green-bone skeletons, giving him a certain foundation. The core combat strength of the camp consisted of 3 first-tier low-level greenbone bone spirit warriors, 12 greenbone warriors, and Audrey, a first-tier low-level knight. Medivh generally did not participate in battle. Aside from eating and resting, he spent all his time meditating and reviving skeletons. The camp needed more laborers. Looking at the depot forts, which were not even half finished, Medivh decided to revive some gray-bone skeletons. The camp already had a certain level of combat strength and needed to speed up basic construction. When refining bones with a history of 5 to 50 years, he consumed very little mana. In 5 days, he refined all the bones of this type stored in the warehouse into gray-bone components, and assembled 36 gray-bone skeletons. These bones had been produced after the Chaos and Odyssey, so skeleton farmers were comparatively rare. They consisted of 24 gray-bone warriors, 8 gray-bone hunters, and 4 gray-bone farmers. Gray-bone skeletons lacked sufficient accumulation of history, so their strength was average. The strongest gray-bone warrior among them was only equivalent to a well-trained militia member. Medivh had not expected them to fight. They were all laborers for building the camp. During the days he was reviving gray-bone skeletons, camp construction made further progress. The fortifications in the area of row 6, column 4 were completed. In the area of row 7, column 4, a 20-meter horizontal section of fortification was built, and in the area of row 7, column 5, a 30-meter vertical section of fortification was built. The 3 sections of fortification were connected by aerial corridors, and the northeast corner gate and the northeast corner gate sealed off the camp's northeast corner. At this point, the north side of the camp was closed off, and the camp could only be entered through the main gate or through gaps in other directions. In the area of row 4, column 6, there was now a 20-meter long vertical section of fortification, and the west middle gate had been built. At present, The fortifications on both the west and east lines are being built southward together, and every day upon waking there is considerable progress. Uncle Venice, aren't we taking Winterfort? While Medivh was quietly developing, a fairly large slave hunting team arrived outside Winter Canyon. The slave hunting team did not head south into the canyon, but instead moved east along the edge of the Winter Mountains. Clearly, taking Winter Canyon would only require a few days to return to the territory of the Givote Federation, but the captain of the slave hunting party chose a detour that would take at least 1 or 2 extra months. This left Sherlock, who was hunting slaves in the Odyssey region for the first time, very puzzled. My dear nephew, you're too young. Don't you know what those nobles of the Federation are like? We captured these slaves at enormous risk. If we pass through Winterfort, how many do you think will be left? Venice sarcastically instructed his nephew. If they went through Winterfort in their current situation, they were afraid there would be nothing left to profit from. Winterfort was responsible for maintaining border security and did not permit slave hunting parties to enter the Odyssey region to hunt slaves on their own. Given the greedy nature of the Federation nobles, having all the slaves they captured confiscated would already be getting off lightly. They would very likely also be saddled with a huge fine. Even without all that, Venice still would not go through Winterfort. Merchants pursue profit, and he did not want to pay a hefty entry tax and commercial tax. If he secretly transported this batch of slaves back to the slave trading house, the profit would be enough for him to squander for several years. Uncle Venice, you're really shrewd. Sherlock was suddenly enlightened. Sure enough, older really is wiser. By the time the slave hunting party passed the mouth of Winter Canyon, it was already getting late. The convoy moved forward a bit farther, and the hunters pitched their tents before dark. Uncle Venice. In the dim yellow sunlight, Sherlock stared at the tent holding the slaves, rubbing his hands eagerly. While transporting the slaves just now, he had accidentally caught sight of the female slave in the black cloth cage, and his heart itched with desire. Look how little self-control you have. This batch of goods is off limits. Venice tapped Sherlock with his cane, telling him not to get any ideas about the slaves in the tent. He had been lucky to catch this batch of goods, and taking them back to the slave trading house would fetch a high price at auction. He absolutely could not let Sherlock fool around and lower the value of this batch. But Sherlock looked extremely impatient, burning with desire. What's the point of green girls? Once we get back to the slave trading house, I'll treat you. The women on Red Street are all experienced hands. Then you'll have plenty to choose from, kid. Venice gave his deputy a look, and the burly man got the message and dragged Sherlock away. Along the way, the big man kept telling dirty jokes and talking about the various delights of the girls on Red Street, diverting Sherlock's attention. Captain Venice, we've discovered a necromancer camp. On the afternoon of the second day, the slave hunting party discovered a fortification camp not too far from the Winter Mountains while advancing along the road. How is that camp defended? The slave hunting party had come to the Odyssey region to make a fortune, and if conditions allowed, they did not mind acting as raiders for once. That camp has about 100 skeletons, and we only saw one mounted guard. The camp is enclosed by walls for more than half its perimeter. Only the southern wall is missing to complete the enclosure. The scout cavalry gave a detailed report of what they had observed, describing the scene they saw. A necromancer, rather rare. I wonder if any clients would like this kind of merchandise? Venice rubbed his chin and muttered to himself. Whether or not there were buyers for a necromancer slave, they were definitely going to plunder today. Necromancers need pure corpses to cast spells. That stuff has to avoid the eyes of the Church of Light and be smuggled to plains not blessed by the God of Light. Venice made his first pot of gold by smuggling pure corpses, so he knew the prices well. For this necromancer to create nearly 100 skeletons, the number of pure corpses consumed would only be greater. This was a big fat sheep. How could they possibly let it go? If it were any other mage, Venice would only fear that he wasn't running fast enough and wouldn't dare appear within the other's line of sight. Necromancers were not in that category. They were targets that knights of the same rank could bully at will. Even lower-rank knights had a chance to win above their level. Necromancers had long since become synonymous with trash. Nobody better fight me for this. The scout cavalry discovered Medivh's camp, and Medivh discovered them as well. By the time the slave hunting group arrived, the skeletons had already formed up in defensive formation at the southern gap. When he saw Audrey mounted behind the skeletons, the anger that had been suppressed in Sherlock flared up again. He shouted and charged toward Audrey, wanting to capture her. The big men of the slave hunting group burst into laughter. They were all veterans and knew why Sherlock was so impatient. The corners of Venice's mouth curled up, and he did not stop Sherlock. He wasn't worried about Sherlock's safety. His nephew was a first-rank low-level knight, and he didn't believe there was anything in the Necromancer camp that could threaten Sherlock. Audrey was just worried about not having a chance to prove herself, so she rode out to meet him. A knight. Seeing that Audrey was not at all at a disadvantage, Venus's pupils narrowed to a slit. That Necromancer actually has a night guard. No wonder he can survive in the Odyssey region. What are you still dawdling for? Hurry up and smash that bunch of skeletons for me. Then go help Sherlock. Seeing his men still bragging and joking around, discussing who would go solo that group of skeletons, Venus shouted angrily and told them to hurry up and make a move. If his precious nephew were seriously wounded or taken down by that knight fighting desperately, it would be a huge loss. How could that be possible? The big men of the slave-hunting group attacked with the thought that a light swing of the sword would turn the skeletons into a pile of broken bones. What they got in return was a chill through the heart and wind leaking from their necks. The skeletons they had dismissed so easily struck them down with fatal blows. They collapsed to the ground in confusion and fear of death. Damn it! The vice-captain of the slave-hunting group was filled with terror. In just an instant, only a few senior apprentice knights remained by his side. All the other warriors had been killed by the skeletons. Those skeletons were terrifyingly strong. He was surrounded by 3 bone spirit warriors at the level of first-rank knights, with no way to escape. Sherlock, run. The situation changed abruptly. The vice-captain, a knight-level fighter, was battered around like a spinning top by 3 bone spirit warriors, and the last few senior apprentice knights fell one after another. Only then did Venus realize they had kicked a hard iron plate. He mounted his horse and called for Sherlock to run. Where do you think you're going? Medivh leaped up and struck with his sword, knocking Venus off his horse. Venus was wearing soft armor, so he wasn't cut to death in a single blow. Your Excellency, mage, I meant no offense. I am willing to offer generous compensation. Please forgive my recklessness. Venus knelt in terror and begged for mercy. Most mages are greedy, and a necromancer who needs pure casting materials would only be even more short of money. Venus wanted to buy his life with money. Offense. There was no such thing. Medivh revealed a cold smile. Just as Venus's pupils relaxed and he thought a deal had been reached, a sharp sword pierced through his heart. The dead do not speak of offense. What followed was Medivh's declaration of death. He would not let a single enemy escape. On the other side, Sherlock was panicking, and while trying to flee with all his might, he was cut down from his horse by Audrey. The skeletons were cleaning up the battlefield, and the deputy commander of the slave-hunting group was already dead. Hey, Medivh, I killed a knight. Audrey dragged Sherlock's corpse back, hopping and skipping in front of Medivh to claim credit. Well done. Medivh showed a warm smile and gently patted Audrey on the shoulder in encouragement. Hee, next time a different position would be even better. Audrey bent over and deliberately twisted a few times. Medivh resisted the urge to kick her from behind and directed the gray-bone skeletons to search the slave-hunting group's wagons. The tarpaulin covering the wagons was lifted, revealing the cages inside. 3 cage wagons carried 25 female slaves. Those female slaves all had traits different from ordinary people, clearly indicating they were female slaves of other races captured by the slave-hunting group from non-human tribes. In the Givote Federation, female slaves of other races were luxury goods. Medivh had once been taken by his father to an auction and remembered it vividly. There are many non-human tribes in the Odyssey region, and slave-hunting groups often come here to make a fortune. Medivh, what should we do with them? Audrey followed behind Medivh, curiously sizing up the non-human female slaves in the cages. Take them back to the camp. Kill anyone who runs. Medivh said flatly, then turned and left. Meaningless killings served no purpose. These native inhabitants of Odyssey might be able to provide useful intelligence. Among those non-human female slaves, some could understand the human tongue, and they were whispering softly in a language Audrey could not understand. Audrey paid them no mind and had the gray-bone skeletons pull the wagons to Fort Treasury Camp, then opened the cages as Medivh had ordered and let the group of female slaves out. The group of female slaves was settled in an unused warehouse in the western fort of the camp. The slave-hunting group's attack had no impact whatsoever on Fort Treasury Camp. Medivh was immersed in refining bone components and paid no attention to anything else. Don't run, or you'll die? In the dead of night, faint noises appeared in the warehouse. Some non-human female slaves wanted to escape, but were stopped by a catfolk warrior. She knew very well how strong that group of skeletons was, and that human leader had little interest in them. There was no way their escape could succeed. It would only anger that human leader and bring deadly disaster upon the others. For the safety of her people, she could not allow the female slaves of other races to escape. Under the catfolk warrior's persuasion, The non-human female slaves gave up trying to run away and stayed at Fort Treasury Camp. Over the next few days, the camp leaders seemed to have forgotten about them and paid them no attention at all. Only Audrey occasionally came to see them, and then the skeleton cook delivered food on time. They were like air in the camp. As long as they did not wander around, no one paid them any mind. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 days passed, and no uninvited guests visited Fort Treasury Camp. During this time, the non-human female slaves witnessed the changes in Fort Treasury Camp. The forts on the east and west sides of Fort Treasury Camp had already been completed. On the south side, the skeletons were building inward from both ends toward the middle. The south side fortification will join up at the position of the south central gate. Before long, Fort Camp will be sealed off, and entry and exit will only be possible through the main gate beneath the corridor. It seems like the last chance, but in fact there is no chance at all. The catfolk warrior had been keeping track of the number of skeletons. During this period, 9 white skeletons and 15 green skeletons had been added to the camp. She also noticed that one of the armored green skeletons wielding a sword and shield had grown even stronger. The camp seemed to have gaps, but in reality it was watertight. If they ran, they would immediately alert the patrolling skeletons. The catfolk warrior's observations were not wrong. During this time, a greenbone warrior had indeed awakened and advanced to become a first-tier bone spirit warrior. Judging from the current situation, they seemed to have no reason to exist. This was a very dangerous situation. Having no value and not being needed meant they could be discarded at any time. Given the camp leader's attitude, they would probably be wiped out and buried in the ground just like those slave hunters. Then, after rotting, turned into material for the camp leader to refine skeletons. Exiled, you are a mind whisperer. You understand the human language and can speak with humans, so pass on my message for me. Say that I am willing to serve him, and ask him to assign me some work. Passively waiting would most likely get them eliminated, so the catfolk warrior chose to take the initiative and show her value. Exiled, don't go, the humans will toy with you. Because slave hunting groups often came to the Odyssey region to capture non-human girls and sell them to the Givote Federation as female slaves, they had a very poor impression of humans. The catfolk warrior's companions tried to persuade her not to walk into the tiger's den. Actually, if he wanted to, we had no ability to resist at all. Exiled stated the truth bluntly. They had no room to choose. If this is truly necessary, then I will take up the duty of a spirit cat warrior and protect Exiled. Protect everyone. Exiled pressed down on her worried-looking younger sister's shoulder and had Exiled go with her to meet the camp leader. Stop. This is not a place you should come. I know you can understand what I'm saying. Just as Exiled and Exiled approached the brick and tile cottage, Audrey stopped them. Audrey was fulfilling her promise to travel together, acting as Medivh's guardian knight. As for whether Medivh actually needed a guardian knight, that was another matter. In any case, this was what she had been doing for the past few months, and Medivh had not told her to stop patrolling. Lady Knight Audrey, we wish to request an audience with Lord Medivh. Exiled and Exiled did not step back and stated their purpose. How amazing, how did you do that? Audrey looked Exiled up and down curiously. Exiled was clearly not speaking aloud, yet she was able to converse with her. I am a mind whisperer. The voice of the mind can transcend the barrier of language. Exiled briefly explained why she could understand the conversations between Audrey and Medivh and why she could communicate with them. Oh, I see. Then what is your purpose? Audrey did not let them pass and eyed the 2 catfolk girls suspiciously. What if they intended to assassinate Medivh or had some other motive? Miss Audrey, you've seen that we've been staying here for quite some time, but we've never had any presents. We want to pledge loyalty to Lord Medivh and work for him. Exiled conveyed Exiled's thoughts to Audrey. Wait here, I'll go ask Medivh. After thinking it over, Audrey felt that was indeed the case. She told Exiled and Exiled to wait where they were while she went to ask Medivh what he thought. She was very curious how Medivh would deal with this group of non-human female slaves he had acquired by accident. Bring them over. Medivh would not keep kindly supporting idlers forever, and he was fairly satisfied that the catfolk had the awareness to come forward on their own to serve him. He did not refuse to meet them and had Audrey bring the 2 catfolk over. You want to pledge loyalty to me? Picking up the tea on the table and taking a sip, Medivh stared straight at the 2 cat girls, his gaze deep and unreadable, making it impossible to tell what he was thinking. I am a spirit cat warrior, willing to fight for you. With Exiled's explanation, Exiled stepped forward, saluted Medivh, and then displayed her abilities. A damaged spirit mark on her forehead lit up, and Medivh could sense extraordinary power gathering within her body. Spirit Mark warriors are one of the extraordinary inheritances of the spirit cat race, equivalent to a combination of magic runes and knights. Suexiang is an unranked Spirit Mark warrior, equivalent to a mage apprentice. Also being unranked, an apprentice Spirit Mark warrior is much stronger than an apprentice knight of the same level. After all, apprentice Spirit Mark warriors wield extraordinary power. While Suexiang was demonstrating her abilities, Audrey gripped her sword hilt and stared at her closely. If she dared make any suspicious move, Audrey would strike. Come here. After Suexiang finished her demonstration, Mediv beckoned to her, signaling Suexiang to come closer. Suexiang concealed the spirit mark on her forehead and obediently walked over. Meow? When Mediv reached out his hand, Suexiang let out a soft whimper. She did not resist and silently cooperated with Mediv's handling. You are very self-aware. Mediv was only testing Suexiang's obedience, and after handling her for a while, he withdrew his hand. Clearly, this spirit cat warrior had already prepared herself mentally before coming and was very compliant. Mediv did not mind having a few more adornments in the camp. He could endure loneliness and grow in secret, but that did not mean he was used to solitude. From the way he brought Audrey to the Odyssey region, it was clear that Mediv did have some social needs. He was no perverted necromancer who would spend his whole life in the company of skeletons. He enjoyed vibrant life. From today on, those girls will be under your management. Take them to learn the human language. I don't want you still bringing a translator the next time you report to me. Mediv put Suexiang in charge of the female slaves of other races, and her first task was to teach them the human language. After assigning the task, Mediv waved his hand for Suexiang and Suexin to leave the brick house, and not disturb him in refining skeletons. Mediv, you must have felt really good just now, right? Touch mine too. After Suexiang and Suexin left, Audrey moved closer. Isn't my intention clear enough already? Can't there at least be a first come, first served? Don't worry, once I'm free, you'll be the first one I deal with. Mediv smiled faintly and granted her wish. Kuberg camp was about to be completed, and the skeletons in the camp had reached a certain scale. The situation was no longer as urgent as when they had first arrived, so Mediv was not as stern as at the beginning. Audrey nodded, overjoyed. After Mediv stopped, she very consciously walked out of the brick house so as not to disturb him in refining skeletons. Suexiang, were you bullied? Suexiang did not let Suexin mention what happened during the meeting, only telling everyone that she had won the camp leader's approval. Suehua paid great attention to details, even if others could not tell. She could see traces that Suexiang's collar had been tampered with. It's okay, I will protect Suehua. Suexiang smiled and comforted Suehua. Mediv's test of obedience made her realize that day was unavoidable. Now it only depended on when Mediv would become interested in her. She was already prepared. In order to protect Suehua and protect her people, she would do her best to do what she should. After a while, Audrey came over. In the camp, only she and Mediv were human. Mediv was busy refining skeletons, so the job of teaching the beastkin girls the human language could only fall to her. During the instruction process, Audrey watched Suexiang and this group of beastfolk girls. Suexiang had received the same treatment as her, and this group of beastfolk girls would gradually integrate into Cabello camp. The beastfolk girls were mainly spirit cat girls, numbering as many as 15. In addition, there were 6 spirit fox girls and 4 spirit rabbit girls. The extraordinary legacies of these 3 groups were roughly similar, including spirit mark warriors and spellcasters such as sorcerers. Among the 25 beastfolk girls, only Suexiang was an apprentice spirit mark warrior, which made her an extraordinary one. Some of the other girls had special talents. For example, Suexin was a heart speaker, and Suehua had some knowledge of herbal potions. They were potential extraordinary ones, but they had not inherited extraordinary power. After the undead scourge came the War of the Gods, waged to redraw territorial boundaries. Then came Ragnarok, the hunt for the gods, followed by the War of all races after Ragnarok. After one war after another, it was not only necromancers whose legacies were lost, the extraordinary legacies of human knights and mages, as well as those of other races, were also lost in great numbers. It is said that extraordinary ones used to be everywhere, but now even first-tier extraordinary ones are worthy of attention. In the entire Odyssey region, there are not many extraordinary ones to be seen. This shows how far the strength of all races had declined after the War of all races. In the blink of an eye, another half-month passed, at the transition between early and mid-September. 5 months after Mediv became a pioneer and left Luolan City, the southern wall of Cabello camp was completed. In 5 months, Medivh went from sleeping rough in the wilderness to possessing a Cabello camp, gaining a foundation on which to settle down and make a living. In Cabello camp, the skeleton force had expanded again, with 72 gray-bone skeletons, 56 white-bone skeletons, and 88 green-bone skeletons. Among the green-bone skeletons, there were 4 first-tier, low-level bone spirit warriors. With those 4 first-tier bone spirits, plus Medivh and Audrey, the 2 first-tier knights, Cabello camp could not be considered a top power in the Odyssey region, but at least it would not be bullied at will. Suexiang, is there an ancient battlefield nearby? The skeletons Medivh revived were divided by profession. Skeleton farmers had far weaker combat ability than skeleton warriors of the same age. Farming was certainly important, but without enough force to protect one's property, everything was in vain. In the Odyssey region, force stood above all else. Including Cabello camp, Medivh had found a total of 3 residential area ruins. These 3 ruins were all villages abandoned after the Odyssey War, and the unearthed remains were mainly farmers, with not many warriors. Medivh wanted to find an ancient battlefield to excavate, so that he could obtain more warriors' remains. If luck was on his side, he might even find the remains of extraordinary ones such as knights and mages. Medivh's appointment as a pioneer had been extremely sudden, and he had had no time to prepare at all. He had no chance to study the history of the Odyssey War and knew nothing about the distribution of ancient battlefields. The same was true for Audrey. She had never imagined that one day she would come to the Odyssey region. If he wanted to learn the war history of the Odyssey region, he could only gather information from the natives. When he took in those beastfolk slave girls, he had that consideration in mind as well. There is a battlefield nearby where the catfolk ancestors fought. Suexiang spoke haltingly. This time she did not have Suexiang relay her words, instead showing Medivh the results of her learning. The spirit cat tribe had migrated several times in the Odyssey region, and Suexiang had heard the adults mention the spirit cat tribe's past. Good, we'll set out after dark. Medivh showed delight on his face. He had only asked casually and had not expected Suexiang to really know of an ancient battlefield nearby. In terms of strength, Cabello camp did have some, but that was not a reason to show off. The necromancers may have fallen on hard times, but that doesn't mean a group of skeletons walking around in broad daylight would go unnoticed. Medivh's skeletons were not ordinary skeletons, so it wasn't as if they couldn't handle small or medium-sized thug gangs. But this was an unnecessary battle, and clearing out thug gangs would bring Medivh no improvement whatsoever. What he needed were remains with history, not fresh corpses blessed by the holy light. Meaningless battles should be avoided as much as possible. Wouldn't it be nice to just peacefully farm in the Odyssey region? At dusk, Medivh left behind 2 Tier 1 bone spirit warriors and some green bone skeletons to guard the camp, and took Audrey, Suka, and the other skeletons to that ancient battlefield. They had not gone far to the northeast before night fell. Night was the time for beasts and nocturnal races, and thug gangs would all hide in camps or temporary shelters to rest, with few daring to move around in the dark. The ancient battlefield Suka mentioned was not far away, only a little over 20 li from Fort Ku camp. The skeletons knew no fatigue, and with a light jog the whole way in a rapid march, they reached their destination in just over an hour. According to Suka, this ancient battlefield dates back more than 250 years, back when the Givit Federation had not yet fully withdrawn from the Odyssey region. The Spirit Cat tribe encountered a retreating frontline army during their migration route, and a great battle broke out. That encounter battle dealt a devastating blow to the Spirit Cat tribe, and they still have not recovered to this day. As he stepped into the ancient battlefield overgrown with wild grass, Medivh mobilized necromantic power to investigate. Suka's memory was correct. In Medivh's spiritual vision, densely packed bones appeared, piled in the shallow layers beneath the surface. There had been no victor in that encounter battle, as both the Spirit Cat tribe and the Givit army had suffered heavy losses. Neither side fought to the bitter end. After hastily dealing with the bodies of their own kin and comrades, they retreated. After detecting the remains, Medivh waved for the skeletons to excavate the spots he had marked. Very soon, skeleton after skeleton was carried before him. Those remains had all been looted, with no grave goods left at all. Medivh did not care about that. His target was these nearly decayed bones, not burial items. Medivh casually chose a few sets of bones and cast his spell, and what he obtained were all top-grade green bone parts more than 250 years old. Suka had not lied to him. This was a high-quality ancient battlefield very suitable for his excavation. After casting the spell once again, Medivh obtained a completely different bone part, a spirit cat warrior's arm bone. It wasn't as if he had never smelted catfolk bones before, yet what he had obtained then were still human skeleton parts. This arm bone part, with spirit patterns on its surface, came from a spirit pattern warrior. Extraordinary power had made it unique, preserving its catfolk characteristics. This was not an isolated phenomenon. In the refining that followed, Medivh also obtained other spirit cat warrior bone parts, as well as spirit cat warlock bone parts. In addition, there were human knight bone parts and human mage bone parts. From this, it was clear that in that brutal encounter battle, quite a few extraordinary beings had died on both sides. Over these past few months, all the bones Medivh had refined belonged to ordinary people. He was very much looking forward to seeing what kind of skeletons these extraordinary beings' bones could bring back to life. Suppressing the anticipation in his heart, Medivh smelted as many of the bones excavated from the ancient battlefield as possible. By 4:30 in the morning, with his magical power completely exhausted, Medivh had the skeletons load the remaining bones onto handcarts and transport them back to Fort Ku camp. Medivh was not greedy. He ended the excavation and quietly returned to Cabello camp before dawn. After getting home, he immediately began meditating, wanting to restore his mana as soon as possible, to reanimate those extraordinary skeleton parts. This was truly difficult. After recovering, Medivh selected a set of spirit cat warrior skeleton parts for assembly and reanimation. This reanimation was extremely difficult. It had been a long time since he had felt so utterly exhausted and drenched in sweat. The hard work brought a sweet reward. After that spirit cat warrior stood up, Medivh was immersed in the feedback from the spring of time. When he opened his bright eyes again, not only had his depleted mana recovered, even his spiritual power had increased by a large margin. He was now closer to becoming a senior mage apprentice. A few more instances of feedback like this, and he would advance. After checking his own condition, Medivh began studying the masterpiece he had created. That green bone spirit cat warrior came with its own bone armor, and its build was far more slender than that of a human green-boned warrior, making it obvious at a glance that it was an agility-type warrior. The spirit cat warrior's weapons were, first, retractable triple-bladed bone claws on the backs of both hands, second, a single-edged claw blade at its waist, and third, a short crossbow on its back. The most distinctive feature of the spirit cat warrior was the spirit patterns on its forehead and body. It was a spirit pattern skeleton, possessing the unique power of the spirit cat tribe. When it activated the power of the spirit cat, spiritual power would cling to the extended triple-bladed bone claws, making them incomparably sharp. Its spiritual power could likewise be attached to the claw blade and short crossbow to increase attack power, and to the bone armor to enhance defense. This spirit cat warrior was only an apprentice extraordinary, still just one step short of tier 1. After making a careful comparison, he discovered that the spirit pattern on the spirit cat warrior's forehead was far more complete than the spirit pattern on Suexiang's forehead. He could roughly guess that the encounter had caused the spirit cat tribe to lose much of its heritage. And that was the key reason the spirit cat tribe had fallen into decline and had not recovered even after so many years.